Welcome to the African American Hour. I'm Byron Buckner with 60 minutes of news, information, commentary, and history about the African American community. This week I have readings from the Journal of Blacks in Higher Education, the New York Times, the Oklahoman newspaper. I'm wrapping up with two selections from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution newspaper, and I'm starting with this. Lincoln University receives record $25 million donation from Mackenzie Scott. This appeared in the Philadelphia Tribune newspaper and its phillytrib.com website on December 8, 2025, and was written by Chanel Hill. Lincoln University has received a $25 million gift from philanthropist Mackenzie Scott, marking only the second unrestricted donation in the university's history. The gift will support scholarships, programs, and initiatives for students, faculty, and staff, and will serve as the foundation for a larger campaign focused on student success. Scott previously gave Lincoln $20 million in 2020, which at the time was the largest single contribution in the university's history. Founded in 1854, Lincoln University is the nation's first degree-granting HBCU. Located in Oxford, Pennsylvania, in southern Chester County, the university enrolls more than 1,600 students and offers over 34 programs. Lincoln University was founded to break barriers and create pathways for African Americans to thrive, said Lincoln President Brenda A. Allen in a statement. This investment honors the legacy and propels us forward, enabling us to build on 171 years of excellence and innovation, she added. It is a powerful affirmation to the enduring value of historically black colleges and universities. Lincoln alumni praised the gift, emphasizing its immediate impact on students. Mackenzie Hanks, a recent graduate now attending George Washington University, recalled a time when the university helped her navigate delayed funding. I once had a situation where I couldn't pay a bill on time, and the school helped me by removing a hold on my account and making accommodations, she said. I've seen how Lincoln always puts money back into its students. I'm confident this gift will be no different. Because it's unrestricted, the university can invest in students in the ways they need most. Drake Smith, a recent graduate now attending Yale Divinity School, highlighted the donation as recognition of Lincoln's legacy and Allen's leadership. Lincoln is the genesis of black higher education, he said. Walking on campus, you can feel its history, the struggles and the successes. It began with just one building and a handful of students, and has grown into a top 20 HBCU and leading liberal arts coeducational university. This donation also reflects President Allen's leadership through the pandemic, political challenges, and important university improvements. Mackenzie Scott wouldn't give millions twice without believing in that leadership, he added. Lincoln is one of many HBCUs benefiting from Scott's ongoing philanthropy. In 2019, she pledged to give away most of her wealth during her lifetime, which Bloomberg estimates at $40.1 billion. Since then, she has donated more than $19 billion to nonprofits, educational institutions, and community organizations. This year alone, Scott has donated $80 million to Howard University, $63 million each to Prairie View A&M and North Carolina A&T, $50 million each to Bowie State, Norfolk State, and Winston-Salem State Universities, and $38 million each to Spelman and Xavier Universities. Dillard University received $19 million. She also donated $70 million to the United Negro College Fund, strengthening the long-term financial health of its 37 private member HBCUs. This extraordinary gift is a powerful vote of confidence in HBCUs and in the work of UNCF, said United Negro College Fund President and CEO Michael Lomax in a statement. It provides a once-in-a-generation opportunity for our member institutions to build permanent assets that will support students and campuses for decades to come. Smith praised Scott's generosity and encouraged broader support for HBCUs. You don't have to be a multi-billionaire or millionaire to give, he said. HBCUs need donations from everyone. Her support is especially meaningful at a time when funding for minority-serving institutions is under pressure. The broader impact of HBCUs is significant. They have produced 80% of all black judges, 50% of all black doctors, 50% of all black teachers, and 40% of all black engineers. According to a 2024 UNCF report, historically black colleges and universities generate $16.5 billion in direct economic impact nationwide and support over 136,000 jobs. There are 107 HBCUs in the United States. Lincoln University has played a pivotal role in that legacy. Hanks credits the university for shaping her into the person she is today. Attending Lincoln was one of the best decisions I've ever made, she said. Lincoln shapes you. It doesn't break you. It makes you a better person. I wouldn't be where I am today without them, she added. Even now, I continue to learn from alumni and mentors I meet there. Lincoln still pours into me as if I were still a student. I love Lincoln forever. That was the article titled, Lincoln University Receives Record $25 Million Donation from Mackenzie Scott. This appeared in the Philadelphia Tribune newspaper on December 8, 2025, and was written by Chanel Hill. My next selection is titled, The 2025 Recipients of Harvard's W.E.B. Du Bois Medal. This was published in the Journal of Blacks in Higher Education at its jbhe.com website and written by that journal's editors. It was published November 21, 2025. The Hutchins Center for African and African American Research at Harvard University recently announced the 7 recipients of the 2025 W.E.B. Du Bois Medal. The prestigious award is presented annually to individuals in the United States and around the world in recognition of their contributions to African and African American culture and the life of the mind. The recipients are James E. Clyburn, the United States Representative for South Carolina's 6th Congressional District. He has been in office since 1993 and is currently serving in his 17th consecutive term. Over the course of his career, he has held several prominent leadership roles within the Democratic Party, including Assistant Democratic Leader from 2011 to 2018 and 2023 to 2024, and House Majority Whip from 2019 to 2022 and 2007 to 2010, making him the first African American to serve multiple terms as Majority Whip. Currently, he serves as the ranking member of the Appropriations Committee Subcommittee on Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development. A graduate of historically black South Carolina State University, Congressman Clyburn has also led several efforts to preserve and restore historic buildings on HBCU campuses. Misty Copeland. Misty Copeland is a prominent American ballet dancer and author. Born in Kansas City, Missouri, and raised in San Pedro, California, Copeland is the first-ever black woman principal dancer at the American Ballet Theater. In addition to her work as a performer, she previously served as a member of the President's Council on Fitness, Sports, and Nutrition during President Obama's second term. Copeland has launched her own philanthropic foundation, an athletic wear business, and a production company. She has authored several books, including her memoir, Life in Motion, An Unlikely Ballerina, published by Touchstone in 2014. For her contributions to ballet and diversifying the art form, the University of Hartford awarded Copeland an honorary doctorate in 2014. Marielle Franco, a Brazilian politician and human rights activist, received her W.E.B. Du Bois Medal posthumously. Born in Rio de Janeiro in 1979, Franco attended the Pontifical Catholic University of Rio after giving birth to her daughter at age 19. As a single mother, she went on to receive her bachelor's degree in social sciences and later her master's degree in public administration from Fluminense Federal University. Among many other causes, Franco was particularly outspoken against police brutality. While driving home after speaking at a political event titled Young Black Women Moving Structures, Franco was shot 4 times in the head and killed by 2 unknown attackers on March 14, 2018. Brittney Griner. Brittney Griner is an activist, 3-time Olympic gold medalist, and a professional basketball player with the Atlanta Dream of the Women's National Basketball Association. On February 17, 2022, Griner was detained and arrested by Russian customs after officials found vape cartridges with hashish oil in her luggage. Although she was legally authorized to use medicinal cannabis in her then home state of Arizona, the substance is illegal in Russia, causing Griner to face a 10-year sentence in a Russian penal colony. She was released on December 8, 2022 in a prisoner exchange. In addition to her work as an activist for the LGBT community, Griner now advocates for the return of other Americans detained in foreign countries. She has published 2 memoirs, In My Skin, My Life on and Off the Basketball Court, published by Day Street Books in 2014, and Coming Home, published by Knopf in 2024. George E. Johnson. George E. Johnson is the founder of Johnson Products, a cosmetics manufacturing company known for creating hair care products tailored for African Americans. The company was founded in 1954 with its first product, Ultra Wave, a hair relaxer for men. 3 years later, Johnson Products released Ultra Sheen, a hair straightener for women. Over the next few decades, the company expanded its product line and developed cosmetologist training courses for proper use of its products. In 1971, Johnson Products became the first African-American-owned company listed on the American Stock Exchange. That same year, Johnson became the first African-American to serve on the board of directors of Commonwealth Edison. Spike Lee. Spike Lee is an American filmmaker whose work explores themes of race relations and black culture. Some of his most notable films include Malcolm X, released in 1992, Do the Right Thing, released in 1989, which received an Academy Award nomination for Best Original Screenplay, and Black Klansman, released in 2018, which won the Academy Award for Best Adapted Screenplay. His most recent film, Highest to Lowest, was released earlier this year. Lee is an HBCU graduate, having earned his bachelor's degree in mass communication from Morehouse College. He also took film courses at historically black Clark Atlanta University. Later, he received a Master of Fine Arts degree in film and television from New York University. Amy Sherald. Amy Sherald is an activist and artist who primarily works as a portraitist, documenting the contemporary African-American experience in the United States. Among her many notable works are an official commission from First Lady Michelle Obama to paint her portrait for the National Portrait Gallery in Washington, D.C. Sherald's art is held in numerous museums around the world, such as the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture and the Embassy of the United States in Dakar, Senegal. Sherald earned her bachelor's degree in painting from historically black Clark Atlanta University and her Master of Fine Arts degree in painting from the Maryland Institute College of Art. That was the article titled, The 2025 Recipients of Harvard's W.E.B. Du Bois Medal. It was published in the Journal of Blacks in Higher Education at its website, jbhe.com, on November 21, 2025, and it was written by that journal's editorial staff. My next reading on today's African American Hour is an obituary from the pages of the New York Times newspaper. The title is Viola Fletcher, 111, oldest survivor of Tulsa Race Massacre, is dead. This was written by Alex Traub and was published Wednesday, November 26, 2025. Viola Fletcher who as a child in 1921 saw her affluent black neighborhood in Oklahoma torched by white citizens in what became known as the Tulsa Race Massacre, one of the most violent acts of racial violence in American history, and who, a century later, testified in Congress to the terror she witnessed in the hope of winning reparations, died on Monday, November 24th in Tulsa, Oklahoma. She was 111 and the oldest survivor of the attack. Her death in a hospital was confirmed by Tiffany Crutcher, a close family friend. Her death leaves just one surviving witness to the massacre, Leslie Randall, who was also 111, 6 months younger than Miss Fletcher. The Greenwood neighborhood in Tulsa, Oklahoma, home to about 10,000 people in the early 20th century, became known colloquially as Black Wall Street for the successful entrepreneurship of its residents and the prosperity of the many families who lived there. The neighborhood was destroyed in the massacre, which led to as many as 300 deaths and mass homelessness. Miss Fletcher grew up as a working-class resident of Greenwood. Her stepfather, Henry Ellis, held several jobs at once, from breaking in horses to selling clothes. Viola went to school in Greenwood and attended Wednesday night and Sunday services at a Baptist church. She remembered watching Greenwood men gather to make homemade ice cream on special occasions while women prepared pies and layer cakes. Early on the morning of June 1st, 1921, Viola woke up to a banging sound. She thought it was someone beating a rug, she said, until her mother hollered for her to get out of bed immediately. The day before, word had spread in Tulsa that a 19-year-old black shoe shiner, Dick Rowland, had attempted to rape a 17-year-old white elevator operator, Sarah Page, in the building where she worked. Miss Page later denied that Mr. Rowland had done anything wrong, and the case was dropped. But by then, inflamed by the rumors, many of Tulsa's white citizens were already set on imposing their own idea of justice. Hundreds of heavily armed white men gathered outside the courthouse where Mr. Rowland was being held. Soon, armed black veterans of World War I arrived as well, seeking to prevent a lynching. A scuffle ensued and a shot was fired. The next morning, the assault began. Over 16 hours, nearly 36 blocks of Greenwood were looted and set ablaze. More than 1,000 homes were destroyed, as were almost all of the district's black-owned businesses. The theaters, restaurants, hotels, barbershops, and offices of doctors and lawyers and real estate brokers, according to a 2001 report by an Oklahoma commission that had examined the onslaught. In December 1921, the American Red Cross determined that close to the entire population of the neighborhood had become homeless. There is still no consensus about the death toll. The Red Cross put it at 55 to 300 people. Viola's family fled in a horse and buggy. As they were leaving Tulsa, she recalled, she saw ash falling on the streets, reminding her of snow. She also saw, as other witnesses did, an airplane dropping what looked like firebombs. She passed piles of corpses. She saw a white man blow off a black man's head with a shotgun, she said. Nobody was held legally responsible for the destruction and deaths. In the years after, the Tulsa Massacre was not widely taught in American history classes. In Tulsa itself, memory was suppressed. Police records vanished. Newspaper archives were tampered with, and victims were buried in unmarked graves. Some residents reached adulthood unaware that the massacre had happened. But its 100th anniversary in 1921 brought it renewed attention, coming a year after the murder of George Floyd, a black man by a white Minneapolis police officer, had sparked nationwide protests. By then, Miss Fletcher, a retired maid, was just one of 3 remaining survivors. The 2 others were her brother, Hughes Ellis, then 100, and Miss Randall, then 106. They began telling their stories to national media outlets, testified before Congress, and also joined a lawsuit demanding reparations. With the help of a grandson, Ike Howard, Miss Fletcher wrote a memoir, Don't Let Them Bury My Story, the oldest living survivor of the Tulsa Race Massacre in her own words, published in 2023. The neighborhood I fell asleep in that night was rich, not just in terms of wealth, but in culture, community, heritage. Ms. Fletcher told a House Judiciary Subcommittee in May 2021 as it considered reparations for the survivors and their descendants. Within a few hours, all that was gone. Viola Fletcher was born on May 5, 1914 in rural Comanche County, Oklahoma. Her parents, Lucinda and John Wesley Ford, were sharecroppers who divorced not long after her birth. Her mother married Henry Ellis, and the couple, along with Lucinda's children, moved to Greenwood, where Mr. Ellis built the family a home. The family's flight from the massacre concluded 30 miles northeast of Tulsa in a wooded area called Claremore, where they found safety living in a tent. The women went to the bathroom in the woods, 3 at a time for safety. The family used sticks, string, and rocks to catch rabbits for food. They trapped lightning bugs in a jar for light at night. Viola never received more than an elementary school education. Instead, she worked alongside her relatives as a sharecropper, picking cotton and tending to livestock for $1 a day. In 1929, while her family was traveling in search of work, Viola ran into a school friend from Greenwood. It was one of the happiest moments I'd experienced since our escape from the catastrophe, Miss Fletcher recalled in her memoir. We both wanted to know if either had seen any of the other boys and girls from our school, but we were the first and only ones both of us had seen in 8 long years. As an adult, Miss Fletcher spent most of her life working as a maid for white families in Bartlesville, a town north of Tulsa. As she washed their dishes and tucked their little ones into bed, the journalist Wesley Lowery wrote in a 2023 profile of Miss Fletcher for the Washington Post, she wondered whether they were among those responsible, yet never held accountable for her own childhood's destruction. She married Robert Fletcher, and they had a son, Ronald. The family lived in Los Angeles, where Miss Fletcher worked in a shipyard during World War II. She left Mr. Fletcher when he became physically abusive, she wrote in her memoir. From a relationship with Larry Anderson, she had a son, James Ford, and from a relationship with Alzina Stein, she had a daughter, Deborah Ford. She raised her children as a single mother. She is survived by her son, Ronald Fletcher, and many grandchildren and great-grandchildren. In 2020, the local news media in Oklahoma wrote about Miss Fletcher's 106th birthday. The story caught the attention of a lawyer, Demario Solomon Simmons, who had long been interested in finding legal redress for victims of the massacre. He became her lawyer. Their lawsuit demanding reparations was dismissed by a district court judge in the Oklahoma Supreme Court. In 2025, Monroe Nichols, Tulsa's first black mayor, announced that the city itself would seek to fund reparations by forming a private trust tasked with raising $105 million by 2026, the 105th anniversary of the attack. In 2021, to honor the centennial, Miss Fletcher met President Joseph R. Biden in Tulsa. A year later, she, her brother Hughes, and Miss Randall split a $1 million donation from the entrepreneur and philanthropist Ed Mitson. Hughes Ellis died in 2023. From the night of the massacre onward, Miss Fletcher was never again able to sleep comfortably in a bed, she wrote in her memoir. She preferred a chair, with the light on. When I sleep, it is never very deep or for very long because of the anxiety and the things I see, she wrote. Imagine having the same horrible nightmare every night for 100 years. She found some healing during the massacre centennial when Michael Thompson, the co-founder of a social media company called Our Black Truth, asked her if there was something she had always wanted but never had. Without hesitation, she blurted out that she wanted to go to Africa and meet real live African people. A few months later, at 107 years old, she and her brother traveled to Ghana. Somehow, she wrote of the trip, it has made me feel more whole and sure of my belonging in this life and on this planet. Along with this obituary are 4 black and white images. One is a 1923 photograph. It was taken from a high point overlooking blocks of the smoldering Greenwood neighborhood that was attacked. 2 others show Miss Fletcher testifying before a House Judiciary Subcommittee in May 2021. And the final image is the cover of her memoir, Don't Let Them Bury My Story, that has a picture of Miss Fletcher in her 30s. That was the obituary titled, Viola Fletcher, 111, oldest survivor of Tulsa, Oklahoma race massacre, is dead. This was written by Alex Traub and published in the New York Times newspaper on Wednesday, November 26, 2025. Less than a week before the Tulsa Race Massacre happened in 1921, the Osage Reign of Terror began, which was a series of murders of members of the Osage tribe. This next reading connects the two events. It's titled, Parallel Tragedies. Killers of the Flower Moon, Tulsa Race Massacre started 3 days apart. This was written by Nate Shute and published October 19, 2023 in the Oklahoman newspaper at its oklahoman.com website. With the cinematic release of Killers of the Flower Moon this week, history buffs are brushing up on the true events depicted in the film. One of those events was another historical massacre taking place 50 miles away. The blockbuster Martin Scorsese film, Killers of the Flower Moon, depicts the true events in 1920s Oklahoma when members of the Osage Nation were systematically killed by non-native residents seeking the tribe's oil rights. One of the earliest victims of these murders was found on May 27, 1921, on the Osage lands in northern Oklahoma. 3 days later, the Tulsa Race Massacre began. The 2-day riot, brought on by white supremacists, is now considered one of the worst incidents in racial violence in American history. Both sets of tragedies put a spotlight on white people using violence in Oklahoma to seize wealth owned by minority populations. The discovery of oil in the Osage Nation's reservation gave the group a key to growing wealth, but oil was also found closer to Tulsa at Glen Pool in 1905. This spurred the growth of the city as people of all backgrounds came to the area in search of wealth. According to the Oklahoma Historical Society, Tulsa served as the base for over 400 petroleum companies by 1920, earning the moniker the oil capital of the world. Oklahoma was known for having strict Jim Crow laws after becoming a state, limiting the mobility of black residents. Because of this, a section of land in Tulsa bought by O.W. Gurley, became a thriving area for black business owners, creating what is now known as Greenwood, one of the wealthiest black communities in the country. In May 1921, the Osage Reign of Terror began as Osage headright holders began dying through suspicious circumstances. Historians attribute the murders to the greed of men attempting to obtain the Osage's valuable property and mineral rights allotted them from the oil boom. On May 27, 1921, the body of Anna Brown was discovered in a rural ravine, which was the same day her cousin, Charles Whitehorn, was found dead after he had been shot between the eyes in another part of Osage County. These murders are some of the first federal investigators looked into. 3 days later, the Tulsa Race Massacre began on May 30th after Dick Rowland, a black teenager, was accused of assaulting Sarah Page, a white woman. He fled home to Greenwood and was later arrested, but never charged with a crime. Newspaper columns in the next day's newspapers called for the teenager to be lynched, spurring a white mob to demand Rowland to be released. A group of black men arrived to assist law enforcement, but fighting between the two groups began, leading to the bloody conflict in Black Wall Street. As many as 300 people are believed to have died in the Tulsa Race Massacre. Businesses and homes were looted and property damaged at a cost estimated at $1.5 million, which is close to $37 million today. The film depicts Osage County residents watching newsreel footage of the Tulsa tragedy at the time and makes other glancing mentions to the massacre. In Osage County, 60 people were murdered between 1921 and 1925. Several Osage were either shot, poisoned, or in the case of Rita Smith, bombed. While some cases went to trial and saw convictions, both tragedies possess several cases that have yet to hold the perpetrator accountable. 11 years after filing a lawsuit, the Osage Nation reached a settlement with the federal government in 2011 over the United States accounting and management of the tribe's trust funds and non-monetary trust assets. The $380 million awarded was divided between those who own head rights or shares of the tribe's subsurface mineral estate that lies beneath all of oil-rich Osage County. As part of the settlement, new rules for leasing oil and gas owned by the Osage were instituted, and non-Osage are prohibited from inheriting head rights. While the settlement was not reparations for the murders, the settlement is a gesture that survivors of the Tulsa Race Massacre have yet to receive. That was the newspaper article titled, "Killers of the Flower Moon, Tulsa Race Massacre Started 3 Days Apart." It was written by Nate Shute and published in the Oklahoman newspaper on October 19th, 2023. Next, a reading about fashion. This is from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution newspaper, and it's titled, "How Young Black Men Are Making the Quarter-Zip Sweater Cool Again." This was written by Ernie Suggs and published Sunday, December 14th, 2025. The quarter-zip sweater, long the unofficial uniform of suburban dads, middle managers, and golf course bros, has found an unlikely new champion, young black men. Thanks to TikTok, what started as a playful video that mocked knits zipped to the chin with a fresh matcha latte in hand has quickly taken on the shape of a cultural movement. It began innocently enough about 3 weeks ago when 21-year-old Jason Gyamfi, capital Gyamfi, wearing a navy blue sweater, boldly announced that he had abandoned his trusty Nike Tech sweatsuits in favor of the quarter zip. "I don't do that Nike Tech stuff that y'all little boys do," he said in the viral post. "I'm elegant. I'm classy. Feel me. You can take me somewhere. I look presentable." As with the unpredictability and volatility of social media, the post exploded. It has garnered more than 3.5 million views and spawned a legion of imitators. From college campuses to playgrounds to shopping malls, young black and Hispanic men across the country have posted videos declaring their switch to the quarter zip. T-Pain, looking like a high school music teacher in a dark blue sweater, even got involved in the fun, posting on Instagram 401k and a quarter zip. To many, the quarter zip has long been seen as a harmless sweater that can be casual or dressy. It is a collared pullover that zips partway down the chest. Most men wear it over a button-down, sometimes with a tie. Khakis or a nice pair of jeans are the go-to pants, along with loafers. They are viewed as clean and preppy, representing a phase of maturity most often associated with older white men as a symbol of middle-class conformity and adulthood. On the flip side, Nike Techs, the flowing and bold athletic fleece sets, are closely tied to street culture, basketball, youth fashion, and blackness. Financially, the upgrade from the $100 Nike Techs to a $25 quarter zip also makes practical sense, which is why Gyamfi told the New York Times, "I really got tired of wearing the Nike Tech. After a certain point, when that frontal lobe starts developing, you're like, why am I still wearing it?" For some, the appeal of the quarter zip isn't new at all. Kalfani A. Lawson, the Assistant Director of International Student and Scholar Services at Georgia State University, remembers picking them up in 2011 when he scored an internship doing an archival project at the King Center. "I was looking to make a great first impression," Lawson said, adding that he purchased 2 sweaters from J. Crew. "They allowed me to exude confidence, make a great first impression, and were two staples of my wardrobe at the time that I'll always remember. He laughed about the fact that he wishes he still had those originals, even though he has replaced them twice over. I'm in absolute love with this trend, Lawson said, adding that few groups wear it better than black male college administrators, who he said have the quarter-zip game on lock. If trends are what these babies need to change how they present themselves and the things they engage in, then more of this, please, said Ashley Mohammed, a style consultant and founder of Be Iconic Frames. BEYECONIC. I love what the quarter-zip trend represents and how it makes our beautiful boys look. Celebrity stylist and designer Brian Joel called the trend fun, but said it might just be history repeating itself. He recalled past Atlanta trends where black men dressed preppy while rocking Ralph Lauren and boat shoes. He has also noticed, while shopping, that stores are suddenly displaying quarter zips more prominently. This is probably a quick era of the preppy look, Joel said. You can't forecast something like this. It gets trendy and it kinds of pops. But what started out as a sly inside joke about a declaration of manhood has also evolved into a cultural discussion about how black men should present themselves, especially in today's political, cultural, and financial climate. Call it the politics of respectability, a term coined by Harvard University scholar Evelyn Brooks Higginbotham in her 1993 book, Righteous Discontent, The Women's Movement in the Black Baptist Church, 1880 to 1920. According to Higginbotham, respectability emphasizes reform of individual behavior and attitudes both as a goal in itself and as a strategy for the reform of the entire structural system of American race relations. That is why civil rights activists, protesters, and freedom riders wore suits and ties to marches, even when they knew they faced physical danger, to present themselves as respectable. Respectability politics is also the process by which privileged members of marginalized groups align themselves with the social norms of dominant groups to advance their own position. In that sense, the trend, while signaling maturity and aspiration, also pushes back against stereotypes surrounding how black men look and dress. Still, Gyamfi is careful not to oversell what a sweater can do. I don't think necessarily there's a difference between wearing a Nike Tech or a quarter zip because the clothes don't make the man, he told the New York Times. The man makes the clothes. That was the article titled, How Young Black Men Are Making the Quarter Zip Sweater Cool. This was written by Ernie Suggs and published in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution newspaper on Sunday, December 14th, 2025. On December 31st, 2025, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution newspaper stopped producing a print edition, and it went all digital. This story is the Atlanta Journal-Constitution reflecting upon itself and how it deals with being a publication in a city with a large black population. This reading selection is part of a series titled Turning the Page, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution's Digital Future. The title of the specific story is Atlanta Journal-Constitution Confronts the Past and Looks to Its Future with Black Atlanta. This was published Sunday, December 21st, 2025, and written by Ernie Suggs. On the morning of March 23rd, 2023, staff members at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution were summoned to a hastily called mandatory meeting. Some crowded into a conference room, others logged in by video. Kevin Riley, the paper's editor for 12 years, was there to make official what many had already suspected. He was retiring. What followed was not expected. Andrew Morse, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution's president and publisher, told the staff that there would be no interim editor and no prolonged national search. The decision, he said, had already been made. Leroy Chapman, a managing editor who had been at the paper since 2011, would take the helm. The room fell silent, then erupted in gasp, applause, and tears. Chapman, who had overseen coverage of some of Georgia's most consequential stories, including efforts to overturn the state's 2020 election, had just become the first black top editor in the newspaper's 155-year history. That moment was one of those things you can't really prepare for, he said in an interview. I didn't realize in that moment just how affirming it would be, not only for black journalists, but for a city like Atlanta that defines itself by inclusion and diversity. Atlanta has long been the place where, if you're black, talented, and ambitious, you can get a fair shot. Inside the newsroom, the celebration landed as both a milestone and a mirror reflecting how far the paper had come and how contested its relationship with black Atlanta had long been. That history takes on fresh urgency now as the Atlanta Journal-Constitution prepares to sunset its print edition at the end of the year. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Moore says, is evolving into a modern media company and redefining local news. It is doing it in a national moment where diversity and inclusion are being attacked. The newspaper is reassessing what it meant to black readers, how it has covered race, and how the slow work of hiring black journalists from Harmon Perry in 1968 to a new generation of storytellers has shaped its credibility. For much of their existence, Atlanta's daily newspapers reflected a social order enforced by Reconstruction and Jim Crow. The Atlanta Journal and the Atlanta Constitution of that era, long before they merged into the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, were white institutions built to serve white readers. In the late 19th and early 20th century, Henry Grady and other editors helped to shape a New South narrative that promised economic modernization while openly defending the racial order. Through the Jim Crow era, the papers largely reinforced segregation by writing about black Atlantans through a lens of crime, paternalism, or invisibility. That dynamic did not fully shift during the Civil Rights Movement, but it did evolve. As Gene Roberts and Hank Klinkbanoff, Klibanoff, document in The Race Beat, the Pulitzer Prize-winning history of news coverage of civil rights, the Constitution distinguished itself from other Southern papers by adopting a more moderate editorial stance and by acknowledging, often cautiously, that segregation's foundation was cracking. Klibanoff, a former managing editor at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, said that under Ralph McGill, the paper broke the Southern taboo against speaking frankly about racial violence. He wrote moral arguments against segregation that other white editors refused to touch, even if he stopped short of endorsing the movement's goals outright. In excerpts from The Race Beat in 1938, in his first directive as executive editor of the Atlanta Constitution, McGill declared that henceforth the word Negro would be capitalized whenever it was used. Klibanoff, said McGill, may have been the first editor in the South to abandon the common practice among journalists of the region of writing the word in a lowercase n. Former Atlanta Journal-Constitution editorial page editor Cynthia Tucker, a native of Alabama, said McGill's reputation traveled far beyond Atlanta and mattered deeply to black readers who were accustomed to far harsher treatment from the white press. If you read his columns today, they can seem tepid, but for that time and place, they were courageous. He was calling out segregationist figures when many others wouldn't, Tucker said. Ralph McGill's willingness to treat black people with a degree of civility earned the Constitution a lot of trust among black readers. McGill's protege, Eugene Patterson, authored the blistering 1963 editorial, A Flower for the Graves, after the Birmingham church bombing and read it that night on national television. Their work helped to set a moderate regional tone, showing that a white Southern daily could report honestly without being torn apart by readers or advertisers. Yet, Even as the Constitution gained national praise for its editorials, the reporters who filled the daily news columns remained almost entirely white. The Constitution did publish a weekly section put together by educator Claude George called News of Our Negro Community and covered the Civil Rights Movement, but it largely failed to cover the lives of the black majority in Atlanta. It quoted Martin Luther King Jr. and Ralph Abernathy on its pages, but rarely chronicled the lives of the everyday people those men represented. That gap grew more glaring as Atlanta's black population surged and racial change accelerated. Black families and businesses were far more likely to appear in the black-owned Atlanta Daily World than in the pages of the Journal or Constitution. It wasn't until 1968, in the wake of urban uprisings the presidentially appointed Kerner Commission concluded were the results of systemic racism, that the Atlanta Journal hired its first black reporter, Harmon Perry. Perry came from the Atlanta Daily World, where he had already earned trust in neighborhoods the Journal often struggled to cover. His hiring signaled that the paper was beginning, however tentatively, to reckon with the city's demographic and political realities. His first assignment was covering King's funeral. To his daughters, the first was both history and something more ordinary. I remember him being excited about getting the position because he felt like he had gone as far as he could with the Atlanta Daily World, his oldest daughter, Philippa Elder, said in an interview. And he kind of considered himself a little trailblazer, and he was. In 1988, 20 years after Perry was hired, his youngest daughter, Phyllis Perry, joined the Atlanta Journal on the copy desk and later rose to Cobb County bureau chief. Phyllis Perry said her father's hiring still reads as a door opening, even if he never seemed to embrace the symbolism in the way others did. The mere fact that he was doing what he was doing opened the door for me, she said. But he never wrote anything about that, period. I'm not sure it meant that much to him. But Pete Scott, who followed Perry to the Journal in 1971 as a general assignment reporter, noted those early days could be rough. He remembers a staff meeting that he and Perry attended, where an editor whose name long escaped him noted, perhaps as a joke, that the paper now had 2 black people. I don't know if he said black, but he said, "We had 2 of them," or "y'all," or something like that, Scott recalls the editor saying. "One of you is going to fill out the quota, and the other one is going to be the token." A photojournalist at heart, Perry stayed at the Atlanta Journal for only 5 years. In 1973, he resigned to become the Atlanta bureau chief for Jet magazine. Scott stuck around until 2005, retiring after 34 years, one of the longest tenures ever for a black reporter. "I worked from about 9 in the morning to about 11 at night every night. I never left if I had an assignment," Scott said. "I did a lot of trailblazing stuff for the paper that it didn't necessarily get credit for, but I was a pretty good reporter." Although Perry's and Scott's hirings cracked open the door, it took years before a sustained team of black journalists emerged. In 1971, Tina McElroy Ansa joined the Constitution as an editorial assistant before becoming a reporter, becoming the first black woman to enter the newsroom. She died last year. In 1972, the Journal hired Chet Fuller, who spent 26 years as one of the most influential voices in the newsroom, covering politics and neighborhoods before later becoming a columnist and eventually assistant managing editor. "When I described those newsrooms to students, it might as well be Reconstruction," said Tucker, who was hired by the Atlanta Journal right out of Auburn University in 1976. "It wasn't hostile, but it could be awkward. But if I didn't know something, I'd ask. People were generally helpful." As the newspapers slowly began to diversify their newsrooms, Atlanta itself was undergoing a political transformation. In 1972, Andrew Young was elected the first black congressman from the South since Reconstruction. The following year, Maynard Jackson became Atlanta's first black mayor. One of the reporters who arrived as the newsroom began to take shape was Alexis Scott, who joined the Atlanta Constitution in 1974. In 1928, Alexis Scott's family founded the Atlanta Daily World, a legacy that allowed her to see from both sides what Black Atlanta expected from the white press and what it still depended on the black press to provide. Alexis Scott said that simply showing up mattered. It meant a great deal. People felt they could trust our reporting because they saw us as black people working for the white press, Alexis Scott said, although we saw ourselves as journalists who happened to be black. Alexis Scott spent 23 years at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and Cox Enterprises before retiring in 1997 to take over her family's business, the Atlanta Daily World. Others like Ernie Reese, who covered black college sports, Ernie Holzendorf, who covered black business, and Sheila Poole, who covered religion and stayed at the paper for 35 years, the longest tenure ever for a black staffer, followed. Meanwhile, Tucker was making history of her own. In 1992, she became the first African-American editorial page editor of the Atlanta Constitution. She became editor of the combined editorial pages in 2001, emerging as one of the country's most prominent journalists and one of the most consequential figures in the paper's history. Tucker said her job was to take Ralph McGill's legacy and push it further, a charge she carried out with a sharp, fearless voice that helped to reorient the Atlanta Journal-Constitution's editorial stance on race, politics, and public life, even when it meant taking on black politicians or the family of Martin Luther King, Jr. As a black woman who grew up in the Deep South and who was working as an editorial page editor in the Deep South, it was easy to criticize racism. But I thought it was important for me to also challenge black establishment figures who I believed had gone off course. It was important for me to say those things, Tucker said. It was easier to do that in Atlanta than it would have been in many other cities. Black Atlantans had achieved so much by the time I became editorial page editor that they didn't feel nearly as threatened as they might have in cities where less progress had been made. In 2007, largely because of her work writing about race and attacks on voting rights, Tucker earned a Pulitzer Prize for commentary, becoming the first and only African-American Atlanta Journal-Constitution staffer to win journalism's top prize. Following Tucker's example, by the 1990s and 2000s, the pipeline of black reporters had strengthened as increased black enrollment in journalism schools and changes in hiring practices brought more diversity into the field. That new generation would go on to shape the paper's modern coverage of civil rights, race, and black culture, even as the paper experimented with structured race and identity beats. In the days after his appointment, Chapman set for an in-house interview with the staff of Unapologetically ATL, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution's African-American-centered weekly newsletter. He said what, if anything, his leadership would change about the paper's coverage of black life and black issues. As a black journalist, you carry a responsibility to bring the perspective of black America into the newsroom. That's what inclusivity is, Chapman said. We want to understand needs, aspirations, obligations around opportunity, and outcomes. That conversation became an early signal of how Chapman intended to lead. Soon after, he approved the Atlanta Journal-Constitution's first full-length documentary, The South Got Something to Say, an Emmy-nominated exploration of Atlanta's hip-hop legacy. He also expanded Unapologetically ATL into a standalone franchise, now known as UATL, extending its reach beyond a weekly newsletter to community events, social media, video, and podcasting. If the future of local news is deep engagement and direct relationships with readers, we know there's a hunger for strong reporting on black culture, HBCUs, and navigating Atlanta. UATL speaks to that ethic, Chapman said. It's reflective of who we are now and where we're going. Tucker, now retired and serving as a journalist in residence at the University of South Alabama, said her view of the paper's record comes with a caveat. We did better than many. Not perfect, but I'd give us a B+, she said. A lot of progress came because black reporters and editors fought for it. Any newsroom legacy on race has to acknowledge that. For readers like Thomas Cochrane, the end of the printed paper is not simply a technological shift, but the quiet loss of a daily ritual, and to a certain extent, a civic tool. Cochrane, 77, a retired computer specialist and longtime Atlanta Journal-Constitution subscriber in Fairburn, Georgia, has spent decades cutting out articles, filing them, and carrying their lessons into his community work. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution gives me information I can use to inform our black community, he said. It's become my habit. I get up in the morning and I read my paper. Reading it on the phone just doesn't work for me. Going to the computer just doesn't feel the same. I miss being able to take the paper, sit on my deck or in my bed, and read it comfortably. That's a luxury. Earlier this month, Chapman found himself seated at the end of the fourth row at the Terra Theater. On stage were Nedra Roan and Naja Parker, two original founders of Unapologetically ATL, joined by Deja Page and Brooke Lee Howard. The quartet serve as host of the UATL podcast, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution's newest entry into the crowded audio landscape. More than 200 people, most of them black women, filled the theater to watch The Best Man Holiday. Listen as the host unpacks the film's themes and greet Chapman. Many had come not simply to consume journalism, but to experience it and to encounter the Atlanta Journal-Constitution in a more communal, participatory way than the printed page had ever allowed. It was a quiet but visual testament to how a newspaper, once encountered by readers like Cochrane at breakfast tables, was now being met in theaters, conversations, and shared space. We've transformed from being just a daily newspaper into something broader: podcasts, films, live events, speaking to audiences in the ways they want to be reached, Chapman said. When I'm in rooms like that, my presence becomes part of the connection people feel to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. I understand that desire for connection, and I'm proud we're able to meet it. I'm seeing the future. That was the article titled, The Atlanta Journal-Constitution Confronts the Past and Looks to Its Future with Black Atlanta. This was written by Ernie Suggs and published Sunday, December 21st, 2025, in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution newspaper. That's all for this week. If you would like to replay this program or listen to past editions of the African American Hour, you can find them in the archives of the audio reader service at the University of Kansas. That website is reader.ku.edu. I'm Byron Buckner, and thank you for listening to the African American Hour.
This program is intended for a print-impaired audience and is brought to you by Mind's Eye.
Well, hello, and Happy New Year. This is the history segment, and it is the week of January 5th. I'm Dave Miller. Sure appreciate you joining this week. This week, we're going to have two main components to our program. As normal, we're going to have a This Happened Today in History segment, where we go back and look at what's going on in history on this day. Then we're also going to have some articles. And one of our articles, the first one, will include a 1950 heist of the ancient Stone of Destiny. It's a very different story than the recent heist from the Louvre, where the thieves apparently broke up the priceless jewelry and sold the stones. So very interesting story. It's very human. We turn to the Akron Beacon Journal for predictions of 2025 from the 1925 from a 1925 article. It ranges from ugly people to immortality. Although this is 2026, I thought you'd get a kick out of something from 100 years ago. And then I found an interesting short article that describes the Rockefeller family as the world's first billionaire, and then their later legacy. We've also got an interesting article from the Smithsonian for a 1758 friendly fire incident that really shows the leadership of George Washington in the moment. So, what happened on January 5th? 1757, Louis XV of France survived an assassination attempt by Robert Francois Damiens, the last person to be executed in France by drawing and quartering, the traditional and gruesome form of capital punishment used for regicides. 1759, George Washington marries Martha Dandridge Custis. 1782, American Revolutionary War. French troops begin a siege of a British garrison on Brimstone Hill in St. Kitts. 1846, the United States House of Representatives votes to stop sharing the Oregon Territory with the United Kingdom. 1896, an Austrian newspaper reports that William Roentgen has discovered a type of radiation later known as X-rays. 1900, Irish leader John Redmond calls for a revolt against British rule. 1918, the Free Committee for German Workers' Peace, which would later become the Nazi Party, is founded. 1933, construction of the Golden Gate Bridge begins in San Francisco. 1944, the Daily Mail becomes the first transoceanic newspaper. 1945, the Soviet Union recognizes the new pro-Soviet government of Poland. 1974, warmest reliably measured temperature in Antarctica of 59 degrees Fahrenheit was recorded at Vanda Station. 1993, Washington State executes Wesley Allen Dodd by hanging, the last judicial hanging in America. 96, Hamas bombmaker Yawar Asla is killed by an Israeli-planted booby-trapped cell phone. January 6th, 1449, Constantine XI is crowned Byzantine Roman Emperor. 1661, English Restoration. The fifth monarchists unsuccessfully attempt to seize control of London, England. 1912, German geophysicist Alfred Wegener presents his first theory of continental drift. 1929, Mother Teresa arrives in Calcutta, India, to begin her work among India's poorest and sick people. 1931, Thomas Edison submits his last patent application. 1941, President Franklin D. Roosevelt delivers his Four Freedoms speech in State of the Union address. 1947, Pan American Airlines becomes the first commercial airline to schedule a flight around the world. 1967, Vietnam War. United States Marine Corps and ARVN troops launch Operation Deckhouse 5 in the Mekong River Delta. 1995, a chemical fire in an apartment complex in Manila in the Philippines leads to a discovery of plans for a Project Bojinka, a mass terrorist attack. 2005, a train collision in Graniteville, South Carolina, releases 60 tons of chlorine gas. January 7th, 1558, France takes Calais, the last continental possession of England. 1608, fire destroys Jamestown, Virginia. We reported on that, read a couple articles a month and a half ago. Very interesting story. And like so many things, it actually wasn't what it turned out, was reported to be on the day of. 1782, the first American commercial bank, the Bank of North America, opens. 1785, Frenchman Jean-Pierre Blanchard and American John Jeffreys travel from Dover, England to Calais, France in a gas balloon. That was 1785. 1894, William Kennedy Dixon receives a patent for the motion picture film. 1920, the New York State Assembly refuses to seat 5 duly elected socialist assemblymen. 1927, the first transatlantic telephone service is established from New York to London, England, United Kingdom. 1931, Guy Menzies flies the first solo non-stop trans-Tasman flight, which is from Australia to New Zealand. 11 hours, 45 minutes, and he crash landed on New Zealand's west coast. 1945, World War II, British General Bernard Montgomery holds a press conference in which he claims credit for victory in the Battle of the Bulge. 1954, Georgetown, IBM experiment, the first public demonstration of machine translation system is held in New York at the head office of IBM. 1960, the Polaris missile is test launched. 1973, Mark Essex fatally shoots 10 people and wounds 13 at a Howard Johnson's hotel in New Orleans, Louisiana, before being shot to death by police officers. That stuff was happening in 1973. 1980, President Jimmy Carter authorizes legislation giving $1.5 billion in loans to bail out the Chrysler Corporation. January 8th, 871, Alfred the Great leads a West Saxon army to repel an invasion by Danelaw Vikings. 1297, Francois Grimwaldy, disguised as a monk, leads his men to capture the fortress protecting the Rock of Monaco, establishing his family as the rulers of Monaco. 1815, the War of 1812, Battle of New Orleans. Andrew Jackson leads American forces in victory over the British. 1838, Alfred Vail demonstrates a telegraph system using dots and dashes. This is the forerunner of Morse code. 1867, African American are granted the right to vote in Washington, D.C. 1940, World War II, Britain introduces food rationing. 1964, President Lyndon B. Johnson declares war on poverty in the United States. That was 1964. 1973, Soviet space mission Luna 21 is launched. 1973, Watergate scandal. The trial of 7 men accused of illegal entry into the Democratic Party headquarters at Watergate begins. January 9th, 1349, the Jewish population of Basel, Switzerland, believed by the residents to be the cause of the ongoing Black Death, are rounded up and incinerated. 1431, judges' investigations for the trial of Joan of Arc begin in Rouen, France, the seat of English occupation government. 1788, Connecticut becomes the 5th state admitted to the United States. 1806, Admiral Horatio Lord Nelson receives a state funeral and is interred at St. Paul's Cathedral. 1861, American Civil War, the Star of the West incident occurs near Charleston, South Carolina. It is considered by some historians to be the first shots of the American Civil War. Again, 1861, Mississippi becomes the second state to secede from the Union before the outbreak of American Civil War. 1880, Great Gale of 1880 devastates parts of Oregon and Washington with high wind and heavy snow. 1909, Ernest Shackleton, leading the Nimrod expedition to the South Pole, plants the British flag 97 miles from the South Pole, the furthest anyone had ever reached at that time. 1918, the Battle of Bear Valley, the last battle of the American Indian Wars. 1960, President Egypt Adel Nasser opens the construction of the Aswan Dam by detonating 10 tons of dynamite to demolish 20 tons of granite on the east bank of the Nile. 1996, the First Chechen War. Chechen separatists launched a raid against a helicopter airfield and later a civilian hospital in the neighboring Republic of Dagestan. It turned into a massive hostage crisis involving thousands of citizens. 2005, elections are held to replace Yasser Arafat as the head of the PLO. January 10th, this is the oldest one we've got, 49 BC. Julius Caesar crosses the Rubicon, signaling the start of civil war. 1776, Thomas Paine publishes Common Sense. I need to reread that, come to think of it. 1861, American Civil War, Florida secedes from the Union. 1863, the London Underground, the world's oldest underground railway, opens between London and Paddington Station and Farringdon Station. 1901, the first great Texas oil gusher is discovered at Spindletop in Beaumont, Texas. 1920, the Treaty of Versailles takes effect, officially ending World War I. 1946, the United States Army Signal Corps successfully conducts Project Diana, bouncing radio waves off the moon and receiving the reflected signals. It's a bunch of guys sitting in a laboratory saying, I wonder if we could. That's pretty cool. 1962, Apollo project. NASA announces plans to build the C-5 rocket launch vehicle. It became better known as the Saturn V moon rocket, which launched every Apollo moon mission. 1984, the United States and Vatican established full diplomatic relations after 117 years. 1999, Sanjeev Nanda kills 3 policemen in New Delhi with his car, an act for which he was later acquitted, resulting in a sharp drop in public confidence in the Indian legal system. 1571, Australian nobility is granted freedom of religion. 1759, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the first American life insurance company is incorporated. 1794, Robert Forsyth, the U.S. Marshal, was killed in Augusta, Georgia while trying to serve court papers, the first U.S. Marshal to die while carrying out his duties. 1838, Samuel Morse successfully tests the electrical telegraph. 1861, Alabama secedes from the United States. 1863, American Civil War, ship CSS encountered and sank the U.S. Hatteras off Galveston Lighthouse in Texas. 1908, Grand Canyon National Monument is created. 1922, first use of insulin to treat diabetes in a human patient. 1927, Louis B. Mayer, head of film studio Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, announced the creation of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences at a banquet in Los Angeles, California. 1942, World War II. Japan declares war on Netherlands and invades Netherlands East Indies. 1943, Group World War II. United States and United Kingdom give up territorial rights in China. 1972, East Pakistan renames itself Bangladesh. 1996, Space Shuttle Program STS-72 launches from Kennedy Space Center, marking the start of the 74th Space Shuttle mission and 10th flight of Endeavour. Our first article, let's cross the pond. We're going to go to BBC History, and it's the 1950 heist to reclaim the ancient Stone of Destiny. It was written or updated on December 15th, 2025. The Stone of Destiny is an ancient symbol of Scottish kings. It was taken by 4 university students in an audacious Christmas raid 75 years ago. This was more than a prank. They said they were in fact reclaiming a beloved treasure stolen by English monarch more than 6 centuries before. The article begins. Early on Christmas morning in 1950, Dean of London's Westminster Abbey woke up to discover his home had been visited overnight. Rather than leaving him a nice present, the mystery intruders had made off with one of the Abbey's most prized possessions. Since 1066, the coronation of William the Conqueror, the Abbey has served as a venue for royal occasions. The focal point of these ceremonies was the wooden coronation chair, which had a stone fitted into the base. It wasn't a sparkling gem. The Stone of Destiny was also known as the Stone of Scone. It was a 150 kilogram or 330 pound, do the math, red sandstone block, but it had heavy symbolic significance. And now this 330 pound stone had been forcibly removed. 2 days later, the outraged Dean, Alan Don, made a solemn appeal on BBC Radio over this senseless crime. He said, "It had been in the Abbey for over 600 years, and not until this week has anyone dared to lay sacrilegious hands upon it." That's actually not true. I'll get to that in a minute in the article. This precious relic, continue the quote, is treasured by millions throughout the British Commonwealth and Empire, and not the least by those who, like myself, see it in the symbol of the Scottish descent of our beloved king. He vowed, "I will go to the ends of the earth to fetch it back," end of quote. 2 days later, the BBC's newsreel reported a potential clue. The initials JFS, apparently newly scratched on the chair, are thought to stand for Justice for Scotland and support the theory that the stone's disappearance is the work of an extreme Scottish nationalists. The looting of the stone by King Edward I in 1296 was still a sore point for some Scottish people who believed it had no place being kept in England. After all, the stone had been used in coronation of Scottish kings for hundreds of years before it was taken and lodged in Edward's carved oak coronation throne. Evidence of the Christmas morning rain was visible when the BBC cameras visited. The narrator noticed the trail of damage, showing how the stone was dislodged from the chair and hauled out. The trail led to Poets' Corner, where writers from Geoffrey Chaucer to Charles Dickens are buried or memorialized. A padlocked door there had been forced open, and the stone was thought to have been dragged outside to Millbank, a nearby road beside the River Thames. There, the trail was lost. Police set up roadblocks and closed the border between Scotland and England for the first time in 400 years. Detectives at Scotland Yard, London's police headquarters, worked on the theory that the stone had been dumped in water. Based on an anonymous tip, the Serpentine Lake in Hyde Park was dragged twice. As the report was broadcast, extra hauling gear was brought in to recover an item they thought might be the stone, but it was actually already long gone. The Scottish Covenant Association, founded to petition Scotland to have its own parliament, quickly denied involvement. In the newsreel report, its chairman, John McCormick, shown to be grinning and raising a toast to what is presumably Scotch whiskey. He makes no pretense of being upset, and that's no surprise. It later turned out 4 of the association's young members had carried out the audacious raid. In May 1951, the Glasgow University students Ian Hamilton, Kay Matheson, Gavin Vernon, and Alan Stewart confessed, all in a BBC radio interview, about just what happened that night. It all began on Christmas Eve, when the 3 men broke into the Abbey while Matheson waited outside in one of the 2 getaway cars. The first thing we did was to move away the barrier that keeps away the rest of the public from the stone, recalled Vernon. They pried the stone from underneath the coronation chair and laid it on the floor. Ian Hamilton's coat became an improvised drag mat. Vernon added, Alan and I took an arm of the coat, and Ian took one of the 3 chains of the stone. As soon as he pulled, the stone gave away. But the triumph was short-lived. As they dragged a heavy stone, it broke in 2. I remember how terrified I was, Hamilton admitted. We had come 400 miles, and there, just as we dragged the stone along, it had come apart. Unknown to them, almost 4 decades earlier, a suffragette bomb attack may have weakened it. In the chaos, Hamilton seized the smaller fragment, still weighing about 90 pounds, bolted through the Abbey, carrying it like a rugby ball. Outside, Matheson moved the car forward to warn that a policeman was approaching. Within moments, he was in front of them. Hamilton leapt in the car beside her, covered the broken stone with an old coat, and improvised a story about them being young lovers with nowhere to go on Christmas Eve. The officer, far from suspicious, removed his helmet, lit a cigarette, and chatted amiably, and then let them go. A relieved Matheson drove home alone, but traffic lights about 2 miles from the Abbey, she made a sudden stop that sent the stone tumbling out on the street. Luckily, it was all wrapped up in the rag, so it wasn't damaged, she said. Hamilton marveled, how you picked that up, that stone weighing 90 pounds, and put it in the boot of the car, I don't know. Matheson was shaken but drove on, dropping off the stone segment with an English friend in Birmingham. Meanwhile, with great difficulty, the 3 men got the bigger part of the stone into the second car and fled the scene. Unsure what to do next, they buried it in some woods near Rochester, Kent, and returned home. But they began to worry that the stone had been kept indoors for 650 years. It wouldn't react well to the winter cold. Hamilton told the BBC's Witness History in 2018 that when they returned to retrieve it on New Year's Eve, they found a traveler encampment set up just exactly where the stone was. They persuaded them to help carry the stone to their cars, and the travelers never told the police about them. The stone crossed the border to Scotland for the first time since 1296 and was handed to John Rollo, a businessman from High Bonny Ridge near Falkirk. He agreed with one condition. No one but myself will ever know where it is, because a secret is a secret when it's only with one person. Police never discovered his true identity. When he was interviewed by BBC Radio Scotland in 1971, he insisted tapes must be kept secret until his death. True to their word, the interview wasn't broadcast until 1986. As vice chairman of the Scottish Covenant Association, detectives suspected he might be involved. They visited his factory several times. Little did they know he was hiding the smaller broken part of the stone in his office under his desk. Both parts had to be reunited, and the restoration was overseen by Bertie Gray, a nationalist politician, who fortunately was also a stonemason. It emerged in November this year that Gray gifted leftover fragments to personal and political associates. Once the repairs continued, arguments raged about what to do with it. McCormick reasoned that the Covenant campaign had already received priceless publicity, but feared alienating supporters who respected King George VI, and exposing the association if criminal proceedings followed. A symbolic location was chosen for the return on April 11, 1951. The stone was left at ruined Arbroath Abbey, the scene of 1320 declaration calling for the right of Scots to rule themselves. Abbey custodian Mr. Wishart told Newsreel that 3 men arrived in a car, carried it on a wooden stretcher. Police transported it back south of the border, while senior lawyers decided what to do with the culprits. By then, even the outraged Dean of Westminster had calmed down. He told London Daily News, "I regret the manner in which it was removed from the coronation chair, but I bear no ill will towards the people who took it. I am gratified that it was returned in this voluntary way." 3 days later, more than 30,000 Scottish football fans descended on London to watch their team beat England 3-2 in the home championship. After the match, BBC Newsreel followed many of them as they made their way to Westminster Abbey in hopes of catching a glimpse of this famous stone. The authorities had taken no chances and locked it out of view under extra police guard. On 19 April, Attorney General Sir Hartley Shawcross told the House of Commons that he decided it was not in the public interest to create martyrs or heroes by prosecuting those behind the vulgar acts of vandalism. Amid laughter from some of the colleagues, South Ayrshire MP Emery Hughes suggested rather than vandalism, a lot of people in Scotland regard it as an attempt to recover stolen property. The stone was put back in Westminster Abbey, and in June 1953, King Edward's chair, with the Stone of Destiny beneath, was seen on television all around the world during Queen Elizabeth II's coronation. But that was not the end of the story. In 1996, UK Prime Minister John Major did what the 4 students had set out to do more than 4 decades before. He decided to return the stone to Scotland, but only on the condition that it would be brought back for any future coronations. At a ceremony in Edinburgh Castle on St. Andrew's Day, the stone was formally unveiled. Ian Hamilton didn't attend, but his co-conspirators were there. Alan Stewart congratulated the organizers for doing a far better job than we did in 1950. Gavin Vernon told the BBC he was still grateful the Scotland Yard was not as efficient as it should have been. They should have caught us within several days. As for Kay Matheson, she didn't mind the location of what its new home would be. Quote, "Whether it be Stornoway or Inverness or Edinburgh, as long as it's in Scotland, I'm happy." End of story. As I said, a very human story and had a lot of nice points to it, so I hope you enjoyed it. The next piece is actually entitled From Immortality to Ugly People, a 100-year-old predictions about 2025. And although this was published on December 30th, 2024, it was written by Mark J. Price, or assembled out of the Akron Beacon Journal. I think it's a really interesting look back to 1925. So, if you will, let's go on this journey. Mark writes, "Look around you. The future has arrived. Nearly 100 years ago, a group of deep thinkers dared to imagine what life would be in 2025. Some of their prophecies were completely off target, while others proved to be weirdly accurate." First topic, beauty is skin deep. The future looked ugly to Albert E. Wiggum, an American psychologist. According to his calculations, homely, dull people were having more children than beautiful, intelligent people. If we keep progressing in the wrong direction, as we have been doing, American beauty is bound to decline, and there won't be a good-looking girl to be found 100 years from now, he told an audience in Brooklyn, New York. Looking around the auditorium, he added, however, this lack is not apparent yet, especially here in Brooklyn. Okay, advanced aging. Thanks to science, people would live up to 150 years old. Sir Ronald Ross, British doctor who received the 1902 Nobel Prize in Medicine for his studies on malaria, told a London audience that life expectancy would continue to increase because of scientific advances. This miraculous progress will not stop, he said. A great scientist at Pasteur Institute in Paris has said that in 100 years' time, man shall live to the age of 150. Why not? A famous American doctor suggested to me that we should all be immortal. Who can tell what scientific investigation may bring? No one can say how long we may live when we are free from the ravages of germs. Switching to the rise of the superpowers. English writer H.G. Wells, the author of The Time Machine, The War of the Worlds, and The Invisible Man, foretold a new world order in 2025. Speaking at a dinner gathering in the Hotel Cecil in London, Wells predicted that global power would rest with confederations of people instead of independent countries. In 100 years, there will not be numerous nations, but only three great masses of people: the United States of America, the United States of Europe, and China. A global government is the next topic. E. Fournier, an Irish physicist and chemist, expected a utopian society for those to be lucky and to be alive in 2025. In his 1925 book, Quo Vadis, Some Glimpses of the Future, he offered examples. First, the Earth will be under one government, and one language will be written and understood or even spoken all over the globe. There will still be different races and perhaps allied nations, but travel and commerce will be free and unfettered, and calamities will be alleviated, and dangers met by the united forces of all mankind. The advances in medicines and surgery will have been such that the ailments and limitations of old age will have been eliminated. Life will be prolonged at its maximum of efficiency until death comes like a sunset and is met without pain and without reluctance. There will be no death from disease, and any sort of injury will be curable. New fabrics will be no doubt invented, combining the warmth of fur with the softness and flexibility of silk and the strength of linen. Dresses will be light, so that half a dozen changes of costume can be carried in a handbag, and this will be so designed that each change will involve no more inconvenience than does the removal of a raincoat. The future of yesterday. British scientist Archibald M. Lowe expected the 21st century to offer television machines, breakfast tubes, automatic sleep beds, wireless banking, moving sidewalks, and one-piece suits made of artificial felt. These and other ideas from Lowe's 1925 book, The Future. So, first, waking up on time. A very useful service will be the radio alarm clock. Signals will be sent out at frequent intervals on different wavelengths, say, between 6 a.m. and 10 a.m. every morning, and setting the alarm clock to catch the signal at the desired time will avoid any risk of oversleeping. House and public clocks and even watches will be synchronized by signals sent several times daily, and we shall know the right time instead of finding a variation of minutes all over a small city. Women in science. Women, owing to their accelerated development, will compete on equal terms with men in all branches of scientific research, resulting in faster progressive developments for health, comfort, and speed of thought and life. Many of the new discoveries of the future will doubtless be entirely due to the sex at present termed as fair, a term they will scorn in the days of real equality. The airport of the future. The air traveler will walk into a comfortable and well-appointed waiting room in the center of the city. An elevator will take him up to the roof, where he will step directly into a roomy and really comfortable airplane cabin. There'll be no bumping over a hilly aerodrome, but the machine, mounted on a turntable, will be shot off into the air by catapults and travel through space at over 300 miles an hour. A taste of the tropics. Professor Lowell J. Reed crunched the numbers. Things didn't look good. The Johns Hopkins University instructor warned that the United States would face a food shortage in 100 years. He predicted the U.S. population would reach 200 million by 2025. Well, he was a little off. It's now 345 million, give or take. But in 1925, it was only 115 million. Reed said the nation would have to find new sources to food to feed all of those mouths. This new food supply must be either found in the tropics or provided by the processes for making artificial food from organic substances, Reed told a conference in Williamstown, Massachusetts. The latter would not be practical unless the cost of chemical processes are rendered much cheaper than they are at present. He would probably be relieved to know that modern grocery stores are stockpiled with tropical fruits and lots of processed food. Oof. New York in 2025. Behold the grandeur of futuristic Manhattan. H. Winfield Secor, an associate editor of Science and Invention magazine, enlisted artist Ray Faradell in 1925 to illustrate the probable appearance of New York's skyline in the year 2025. Secor predicted that the 21st century skyscrapers would climb even higher, easily doubling the height of the 792-foot, 60-story Woolworth Building, the world's tallest edifice in 1925. The sky over New York would be darkened by airplanes, airships, and other flying devices. Commuters would travel at least 100 miles to the city via compact and inexpensive air flivvers. New York would also offer local subways as well as long-distance subways. Finally, Secor expected the Big Apple to triple to quadruple deck streets to accommodate the heavy traffic. The lower level of future city streets will be occupied by motor trucks, while the level above this by lighter vehicles such as pleasure cars. The sidewalks, some moving type, in the next 25 to 50 years will doubtless be built above the motor vehicle street and be arranged inside the arcades of the building themselves. This will not only include the sidewalks, at least overhead, as an insurance of against rain and snow, but their arrangement will provide a much better show window and display facilities for stores. Just as a side note, folks, they did include the artist rendering, and if you can imagine, yes, it does show the slice of it shows lots of air vehicles from blimps to cars all flying around overhead. Just the sky is full of them. But there's the street view of 3 different levels or 4 different levels with cables going underneath it. But the buildings themselves are all square or rectangular. They're very much like what we might think of as a 1925 building, where you got one big large block on the bottom, a second block of a little bit smaller size, the third, the fourth, the fifth. They gradually get smaller as it all goes up. They've all got edifices that remind you of 1925 architecture with crowns and various architectural elements that protrude from the side of it. So it's very much 1925 architecture, but shown to be updated with the streets underneath and all the flying vehicles over it. It's really kind of it's an odd looking appearance, but it really speaks to how they use 1925 building structures to envision the 2025. So no glass, no round buildings, none of that. It's all stone and brick. Moving to the city by the bay. Not so fast, New York. Armenian historian Roel Stratatian predicted that San Francisco would be the world's greatest city by 2025. As Asian countries gain clout, the Pacific Ocean would overtake the Atlantic Ocean as the great commercial sea. Consequently, New York would play second fiddle to San Francisco and Oakland. She will be the greatest port of the greatest sea. She will be in direct communication with 2/3 of the world population. He guessed the Bay Area would boast a population of at least 15 million by 2025, and truth is, it's actually closer to that at 7.7. Divine inspiration. Dr. A.R. Wentz, the professor at Lutheran Theological Seminary in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, anticipated these advances by 2025. A substitute for sleep would be found, Its chief ingredient would probably be acid sodium phosphate. Chemistry would be used to produce synthetic foods, making them chiefly out of nitrogen from the atmosphere. People would use pocket-sized apparatus for communications to see and hear each other without being in the same room. Boy, he nailed that one, didn't he? There would be world peace, a common world currency, and universal free trade. Great expectations. The Weekly Scotsman, a newspaper published in Edinburgh, made these prophecies. The books of AD 2025 will probably be printed on nickel leaves, so light and thin that a single volume will contain 30,000 pages, and the pages will be more flexible and durable than paper. The work of the house will be reduced to a negligible quantity, about 100 of electrical devices, not a few of which are in use today, from the opening of the door to removing a meal to cleaning the boots to the automatic cooking of a 6-course dinner. In the world of manufacture, change will be just as revolutionary. Where today we have a score of machines, one of them will suffice. According to Mr. Thomas Edison, a century hence, we shall put cloth, thread, buttons, and so on into one end of the machine, and from the other draw suits complete to the last stitch and ready folded for delivery. Topic: the end of poverty. If society made a concerted effort, poverty would be abolished by 2025. Sophie Irene Loeb, president of the Child Welfare Committee of America, said the continued advancement of widow pensions and child welfare laws would help achieve that goal. Once juvenile poverty was eliminated, the next step would be addressing poverty among adults. There should be no pauper child in this country, and no able-bodied child should be anywhere except in its home, Loeb said. The children, our future citizens, need and are entitled to not charity, but chance. Knee slappers from 1925. Horse-drawn vehicles are fast disappearing from our streets, but jackass-driven automobiles will still be with us 100 years from now. Very true. The daily and hourly progress of madness and folly and wickedness will make at least a fine narrative in history, but probably the people of the future will have so many followers of their own that they will not care greatly for ours in 2025. Now, a scientist declares that there will be nothing to laugh about 100 years hence. We suppose that means 100 years from now there will be no bow-legged girls in short skirts or skinny-shanked men in golf togs. Those who fear that the world will be overpopulated a century hence may underestimate the capacity of moonshine. They are now celebrating the 100th anniversary of the invention of the detachable collar. Judging from the popularity of divorce, 100 years from now, they will be celebrating the invention of the detachable marriage yoke. Okay, a little humor. The Lassen Advocate, a newspaper in Susanville, California, published this joke in 1925. It was the year 2025. The United States had just elected its first woman president. Quote, "Don't you feel that your home life will be ruined?" the inquiring reporter asked her husband. Quote, "My only regret," he said with a sign, "is that I have only but one wife to give for my country." Okay, for better or worse. And finally, we have this. Vivian Gulk, an 8th grade pupil at Franklin School in Wausau, Wisconsin, wrote this poem for a 1925 class assignment. We hope that she earned a good grade. It's entitled, "The World in 2025. How will the world look a century from now? I have seen it in crystallized glass, the marvel wonders which men will perform in 100 years to pass. The radio then will be nothing but play. The movies will cease to exist. If the people could see things a century from now, they'd lament the joys that they had missed. In a century hence, the airplanes and such will be had by the poorest of beings. Science will scorn them as we scorn the chase. Instead, we invent wonderful things. The folks in a century will know what's on Mars. They'll send messages up to the moon. The cars of today will be laughed at by then. They'll make fun of our soaring balloons. There will be wonderful machines, tonics, and herbs, which will cure about any disease. There'll be wonder foods and beverages, too, which will outdo our coffees and teas. In a century from now, the hard-working wife will have nothing to do but rest. For her, work will be done in a few minutes' time, if simply a button is pressed. The men in the factories won't have much to do. They'll just superintend their machine. When they think of men laboring as some do today, they will wonder why we were so green. All I can see in my crystallized glass of the old world in 100 years, but I hope I'm not living a century from now, for my dullness would move me to tears. There you go. Hope that was a fun little look back and an interesting thought into the life of people really 100 years ago. It's pretty cool. Go to the Smithsonian, January, February 2026, the Celebrating America at 250 series. And the article is titled The Haunting of Young George Washington. It's written by David L. Preston. And the foreword is, new evidence helps resolve enduring mysteries about a 1758 skirmish that nearly cost the future president his life and shaped his views on battles yet to come. The article begins, for the rest of his life, George Washington would remember the chaos and tragedy of November 12, 1758. At 26, he was the colonel commanding the Virginia Regiment, a British subject fighting for his king in the conflict now known as the French and Indian War. The soldiers were advancing westward in a campaign to take the Ohio Valley from their French and native allies. The troops had crossed the Appalachians and built a fort called Loyalhanna in what is now western Pennsylvania, about 50 miles east of the strategic French outpost they planned to conquer, which was Fort Duquesne. In the 2019 issue of the Smithsonian, I, the author, wrote about a 1754 document I discovered in the British National Archives, an eyewitness account from an Ohio Iroquois warrior who identified Washington as having fired the first shot in the skirmish that sparked the war. Now, as British troops closed in on the Ohio Valley, Washington was actually about to play a key role in the conflict's end. On that Sunday in November 1758, the British commander, General John Forbes, got word that a French and Indian scouting party was approaching Loyalhanna. After he sent a unit of Virginians into the woods, the roar of muskets was loud enough that Forbes sent Washington out with reinforcements. In the dusky light and confusion, each of the two Virginia parties mistook the other for the enemy. The skirmish would have become known as a friendly fire incident, and Washington was largely responsible for restoring order. He placed himself between the two Virginia units, knocking the soldiers' muskets upward with his sword and commanding them to stop firing. By the time the shooting ceased, as many as 16 Virginians were dead and more than 20 others were wounded. Washington came out unscathed, but in his orderly book, he noted that as his soldiers marched out the next morning, they were to carry a proportion of spades in order to bury the dead. 13 days later, the British captured Fort Duquesne and with it controlled the Ohio Valley on Virginia's western frontier. But Washington remained haunted. In 1787, jotting down his personal reflections for a biographer, the soon-to-be president wrote that his life would have never been in as much jeopardy before or since that moment in the Pennsylvania woods. By that time, everyone knew about Washington's courage during the Revolutionary War. In 1776, he led 2,400 men across the river as rain sleeted down and ice floes drifted past in the darkness. But at Loyalhanna, Washington wrote, he'd faced more imminent danger. Yet the friendly fire incident rarely earned more than a passing glance in the many biographies of Washington. The details and locations remained unknown, even as sites all over the United States boasted that Washington slept, dined, or worshipped there. Between the shame and fratricide and the urgencies of reaching the fort, the soldiers themselves spent little time recording or investigating the event. The mass grave of 16 dead Virginians was never marked or memorialized. As the battle became the stuff of Western Pennsylvania legend, it was up to local historians to uncover the reality. The Fort Ligonier Museum and Historical Society, nestled in Pennsylvania's Laurel Highlands, has played a crucial role. Shortly after the friendly fire incident, Forbes renamed Loyalhanna in honor of John Ligonier, the commander-in-chief of the British Army. The original fort no longer stands, but in the 1940s and 50s, archaeologists conducted excavations and began a stunningly accurate reconstruction of the fort at its original locations using period plans and maps. Visitors can stand at the recreated Western Battery and imagine the monumental labor of building a fort or moving supply wagons through the mountains. In 2008, the museum acquired the handwritten manuscript of the first president's biographical remarks from 1787. Telling a story like the friendly fire incident, says Matt Galt, the Ford's director of education, humanizes Washington and makes him relatable. Archaeology and history have always gone hand in hand at the Fort Ligonier Museum. Board trustee Charles Fagan III, who died in 2025, made it a lifelong mission to investigate the friendly fire incident, given its importance to the Fort Ligonier story. Written accounts, however, offered only vague hints. One soldier's journal placed it in a valley behind a mountain, which could have described almost any site in the vicinity. Fagan suspected that the skirmish had occurred a few miles west of Loyalhanna along Forbes Road, an old pathway whose traces are still visible. But only archaeologists would have been able to locate the site with precision and accuracy. In 2021, Fort Ligonier's executive director, Mary Magnus, asked archaeologists to find the friendly fire location. Jonathan Burns, an anthropologist at nearby Juanita College, had extensive experience in excavating 18th century sites and in the field of conflict archaeology. He also led the Veterans Archaeology Program, an initiative that helps U.S. military veterans explore careers related to archaeology and public history. He knew that the members of this team would bring an extra layer of insight because of their combat experience. In 2022, the team followed Fagan's hunch and began digging near Forbes Road. Sure enough, evidence began to emerge. It was a visceral rush once our team began recovering mid-18th century artifacts scattered across the fields. This ultimately meant that we were locating and documenting the battle actions of that infamous day in history. By the time the dig began, I'd spent years poring over documents as I worked on a book on Washington's early life. Only eyewitness accounts of the friendly fire incident were Washington's own writings, his 1758 orderly book and the 1787 reflections. There are secondhand accounts drawn from our officers and men who had remained at Loyalhanna in 1758, a Pennsylvania German soldier, a Scottish Highland officer, and Forbes. Some of Forbes' officers contributed reports to the colonial newspapers, such as the Pennsylvania Gazette. I was also surprised to discover how many papers in Great Britain had covered the friendly fire incident. Even though the story had been mostly lost to history, at a time it was international news. I began visiting the site and consulting with Burns as the Fort Ligonier staff. After years of reading about the incident, it was a thrill to see the 18th century objects coming up to the surface. Bullets, buttons, buckles, musket parts, and iron hardware. As Burns' team members found each item, they plotted its exact coordinates on a digital map. The spatial patterns revealed important details, such as the size of the battlefield, the location of the firing lines. The variety of buttons and personal effects unearthed at the site provided tangible human connection to the often unnamed soldiers who labored and fought in 1758. One of the most compelling early finds was a copper watch key with a fleur-de-lis, lost by a French or British officer who would have had a watch in the wilderness. The Virginia provincials didn't only understand they didn't wear standard uniforms, but they often looked like civilians. One officer at the time noted that some soldiers wore blue coats while others were in rags. He described one soldier as wearing a light-colored cloth waistcoat and checked trousers. Greg Williams, a Navy veteran and a Smithsonian staff member who was working at the dig site, uncovered a square copper shoe buckle fragment of a civilian variety most likely belonging to a provincial soldier. When I visited the site in July, the heat didn't seem to faze the veterans. One kept digging through a downpour, shouting out the old Army saying, "If it ain't raining, we ain't training." I spent much of my time with David Williams, an Army veteran who received the Combat Infantryman badge during his service in Iraq. He swung the long shaft of the Minilab Manticore metal detector. His touch never failed. On his last day at the site this summer, he made a rare find: 3 dropped musket balls of French caliber on the ground where French and Indian forces fought the Virginia. As a combat veteran, he told me, knowing what happened here brings you closer to the site and makes it more personal. One of my own projects had been to reconstruct the French perspective on the battle at Loyalhanna. Using documents and other historians never consulted, I pieced together secondhand accounts from the French officers and one by the French-Canadian general who fixed the skirmish a few miles west of Loyalhanna. The Marquis de Vaudeville told his superiors in Paris that the Belle Riviere, or the Ohio River, was of infinite importance to the state and especially to his colony. He closely monitored the events there in the fall of 1758. For the French, the friendly fire incident was a turning point in the struggle for the Ohio Valley. The commanding officer, Captain Francois-Marie de la Marchette de la Guinery, had been tasked with repairing the crumbling edifice of French power in the Ohio Valley, both literally and figuratively. Years of flood had rendered Fort Duskin indefensible. Yet, through most of 1758, the French and their native allies had bested the British in battle. In September, they had destroyed a large British reconnaissance force led by Major James Grant, a battle that became known as Grant's defeat. The French followed the victory in October with a spoiling attack on Loyalhanna, designed to destroy supplies and capture livestock so that the British advance would grind to a halt. And speaking of grinding to a halt, we're going to stop the article there, but I promise you we will pick it up next week at this point. Take care. Talk to you then.
Coming up next in the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have episode number 13 of Mark Twain by Ron Chernow. Following that, at 3 o'clock is Smithsonian Magazine, and at 4 o'clock, in place of our re-airing of the Buffalo News, we have the Blind and Disability News Hour from our friends at Mind's Eye in St. Louis. News Horizon simulating 3D environments and accessible gaming, feeling the humor of life with Braille, plus accessibility, technology, health, and community news. Stay with us. following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision,